Whew, that was a rough weekend. Hopefully I can get through this video. Might be a bit of a rough one, but I'm pretty sure I can get through it. Alright. Hey there, all you Magic the Gathering enthusiasts out there. Thank you for clicking on this video. Today, I wanted to continue looking at spoilers from Aetherdrift. There's a few new ones that came out on Friday, I believe. But there's a couple older ones that I wanted to go back and take a look just because I just never got a chance to go over it. And as I was going over the cards, I thought some of these probably worth talking about. So let's just get started. First off, I wanted to take a look at the Ready Rocketeer Engineer. There we go. This card was spoiled a while ago, but I figured I might as well go over all the cards that might have some potential seeing competitive play. So the Ready Rocketeer Engineer is a 5-mana legendary Goblin Artificer. He has toughness 5, and his power is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts you control. And whenever the already enters or attacks, choose target artifact card in your graveyard. You may sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return the chosen card to the battlefield. So he's like an artifact reanimator creature, right? So there's a lot of powerful artifacts with like high mana value. You could definitely build around the Ready. Seeing as he costs 5 mana, I feel like you want that exchange where you're sacrificing maybe like a clue token or something in order to get Portal to Phyrexia back, or you know, a full powered Flesh Gorger. Those are the kind of synergies I'm thinking about with this card. There's also probably going to be a lot of good artifacts coming out with this new set, so definitely a card worth keeping an eye on, while also keeping an eye out for any really good expensive artifacts that's worth reanimating. Next, I wanted to go over Kaladin Triumph Caster, 2 mana, red and a white, for a 2/3 legendary human pilot. Now, Kaladin says, mounts and vehicles you control have haste. Whenever a mount you control enters, it becomes saddled until end of turn, and whenever a vehicle you control enters, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So this is great. This card was spoiled a couple days ago, and I meant to go over it, and I somehow missed it. But this card kind of changes the dynamics of vehicles and mounts, because usually you want to play your vehicles and mounts early, so that when you play your creatures, you can crew your vehicle and get your attack in, or whatever it is. But with this creature, you play this on turn 2, you can get value from your 3-mana vehicles or mounts pretty much on the turn that you play it. Of course, this is all if Kaladin survives. I believe this creature would be a kind of a must remove on the spot. Again, it also depends on if there's enough playable 3 to 4 drop vehicles and mounts. Another card that was spoiled a few days ago that I did not go over. I did go over a different raceway, but Amonkhet Raceway is a colorless land, but has start your engines, and at max speed, it gains the ability to tap, and target creature gains haste until end of turn. It's a pretty cheap way to give creatures haste, especially since this is colorless. You can pretty much put it in any colored deck, so I think this would be pretty good in the late game where you're playing creatures slightly off curve, so you'll have the mana available to give it haste. And again, this is assuming you can get max speed pretty early. I know I kept saying that turn 4 would be the earliest that you can get max speed, but I believe turn 3 is the actual earliest. But that's only if there's a way to start your engines on turn 1 and damaging your opponent on that turn. Next, we have Bulwark Ox. Again, another card that was spoiled earlier. Bulwark Ox is a 2-mana 2/2 Ox mount. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Sacrifice this creature. Creatures you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, and has saddle for 1. Honestly, this is a pretty fair 2-drop. I wanted to go over this card because I hadn't had a chance to go over any of the mounts yet. If you're playing this in a +1/+1 counter synergistic deck, you're probably going to have a lot of ways to pump up your creatures with counters, and this creature is a great way of protecting all your creatures. Obviously, it doesn't protect your creatures from Sunfall or any other exile removal cards, but overall I believe this card will make combat situations a little bit more difficult for your opponent. It also has this really awesome artwork. Next, how do I pronounce this? Achik? Achik. Emerald Raiden. 6 mana, 3 and 2 black and a green. For a 3/3 insect druid. It's a legendary creature, and when this enters, create a 1/1 green insect creature token for each artifact and or creature card in your graveyard. Whenever another insect you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Achik. Each opponent loses 1 life. Another card with a interesting alternate art. I think this card is definitely playable. It's definitely going to be your like top end game ending card, I think, and it's probably going to have to be in some sort of combo deck. Maybe just mill yourself, get a bunch of artifacts and creatures in the graveyard. When you play this, you'll get a whole bunch of insects. Then your opponent will have to kill this creature before they get rid of your insects. Or maybe you have like an instant speed way of sacrificing all your insects. Either way, I think this is a pretty powerful card, but this is a 6 mana 3/3, which means it dies to a lot of removal right now. But yeah, I think this is a card that's worth keeping in mind and maybe brewing a deck around this. At least I'm looking forward to it. Now, I did go over one of the Gear Hulks already, but I figured we'd take a look at the Dimir version of it as well. This is 4 mana, 2 blue, 2 black. It's a 4/4 construct and artifact creature construct. It has lifelink and ward 1. And then when this creature enters, look at target player's hand. You may choose a card from it. If you do, that player discards that card, then draws a card. So I don't think you're going to want to use this to target your opponent. For the most part, you want to target yourself, and think of this as a creature that when it enters, you get to cycle one of your cards. Maybe you're playing this in some sort of reanimator deck or some other graveyard synergistic deck. The alt art looks kind of cool. Kind of gives off a mecha vibe if you're into that kind of stuff. Next, I wanted to look at a couple of the gods that are coming out in this set. First off, we have Aetherdrift Godseeker, 2 mana 5/3 with Indestructible and Haste. Start your engines, and for 1 and tap, target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn, and Aetherdrift can't attack or block unless you have max speed. So a 2 mana 5/3 with Indestructible and Haste is pretty good. I would say this card is going to be fairly playable as long as obtaining max speed is not too difficult. Again, the quickest you can get max speed is turn 3, but most likely you're looking at turn 4. So as long as you can get your engines started really early and consistently, I think Aetherdrift would be a very good card in a mono red deck. It could also be another type of deck that utilizes max speed a lot better, and then in that case, Aetherdrift might fit into that deck instead. But definitely a card to keep an eye out on. And then there's Ketramos, the New Dawn. I believe out of all the gods that were spoiled so far, this seems to be the more popular one amongst spikes out there. And this is a 3 mana, 1 a white and a black for a 4/4 legendary creature god. Has menace, lifelink, and indestructible. Ketramos can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile. So that includes both cards you own and cards that your opponents own. So in general, just whatever cards that are in exile during the game. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards and or the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So the great thing about this card is As long as it can attack or block, you're gaining 4 life every turn because it has lifelink, and since it has indestructible, you're not too worried about having this creature die during combat. And then white and black has a lot of ways of exiling cards, whether it be from graveyards or just exiling your opponent's creatures, whatever it may be. If you can do it during your turn, you get to draw a card. And if you notice, there's no restriction saying that this only triggers once a turn. So however many times you can exile something from graveyard, whatever, you'll draw that many cards. As long as they're all different instances. Like if you exile like 5 cards at once, you're still only drawing 1 card. But if you can exile 5 cards 5 times during your turn, then you'll draw 5 cards. Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say there. I do believe this is going to be a very strong creature. Next, I wanted to take a look at this interesting removal spell. 2 mana, 1 in a black, sorcery. Choose target creature, planeswalker, or vehicle. Mill 2 cards, then destroy the chosen permanent if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. So you definitely want to play this in some sort of graveyard shenanigan type deck, where you'd be reliably either milling yourself or discarding cards to fill your graveyard. And what I think is great about this card is, since you'll be playing it in a graveyard deck, it acts as a removal as well as a way to mill yourself. So it's almost kind of like a 2-for-1, you know? The only downside is that it's a sorcery instead of instant speed. So I don't know exactly how playable this is going to be, but in something like a reanimator deck or a reanimator deck, maybe in like a John Delirium deck as well. But either way, I'll probably be testing out this card in a couple of my decks. Plus it targets not just creatures but planeswalkers and vehicles. The vehicle doesn't have to be a creature for you to remove it, so that's kind of nice. If there's a high number of vehicle decks coming out with this set, then I think Quagfest would definitely be a removal spell to keep an eye out for. Next we have Mu Yanglin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Wind Rider. 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for 2/4 legendary human wizard pilot. When this creature enters, create a 3/2 colorless vehicle artifact token with crew 1. Vehicles you control have flying. Whenever one or more creatures you control with flying deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So my first thought was, hey, this goes well with the new Chandra card, or Chandra Planeswalker, except they both cost 4 mana, so you won't be able to curve one into the other. But it's still an interesting mechanic, I think. Making a vehicle token and giving vehicles flying is pretty good. Next, we have Interface Face. Interface Face. Nope, that's not right. Interface Ace. It's a 2 mana, 1 in a white, 0/4 artifact creature robot pilot. This creature saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles using its toughness rather than its power. Whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it. This ability triggers only once each turn. Essentially, it's a 2 mana creature that can pilot 2 vehicles. It's a very interesting idea, and it doesn't have to be used just for mounting things, mounting or crewing. There might be other reasons you might want this creature tapped and then have it untapped. Yeah, I think this creature has some sort of versatile utility that I'm not 100% sure on what the best use for this creature is, but maybe worth keeping this creature in mind when building decks that have some sort of like tapping synergy. Whatever that means. Alright, on to the next one. Next we have Glory Heath Lynx. It's a 2 mana, 2/3 cat mount. So another mount. Has lifelink, and whenever this creature attacks while saddled, search your library for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle, and saddle 2. It's a great way to continue getting your land drops. I don't know how consistently you're going to be able to saddle and attack in with this creature to get its effect, but you're looking at attacking in on turn 3 with a 2/3 with lifelink. Again, this is another card. I don't think it's gonna be like game-changing, great, or anything like that, but it might be a utility card that comes in handy later. Another card to keep in mind while building decks. Roadside Blowout. It's a 3 mana sorcery. This spell costs 2 less to cast if it targets a permanent with mana value 1. Return target creature or vehicle an opponent controls to its owner's hand, draw a card. This might be more of a sideboard card, I'm not sure, but overall, depending on your matchup, this is a great card. For 1 mana, you can blow out a mono red opponent by bouncing one of their creatures that they targeted their pump spell on, and also draw a card. I think this might be very strong against those type of decks. Next, we have Carrion Cruiser. It's a 3 mana, 2 and a black, 3/2 artifact vehicle. When this vehicle enters, mill 2 cards, then return a creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to your hand. It has crew 1. So this is kind of like a mini overlord of the, was it the Belmerk? The black one. Where it comes in, you mill 2 cards, but it doesn't have to be the milled cards. It can be any cards in your graveyard as long as it's a creature or vehicle, and you can bring it back to your hand. I feel 3 mana might be a bit too much for this type of effect, but it is a vehicle that's easy to crew, and maybe you have graveyard synergy like a Delirium deck or something, so in that case you mill 2 cards, only returning 1. This might fit in well depending on the synergy of the deck. Next we have Perilous Snare. It's a 3 mana artifact. It says start your engines. When this artifact enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this artifact leaves the battlefield. Then it has max speed, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or vehicle you control, activate only as sorcery. So it's a 3 mana gel type of effect, an artifact that can exile any non-land permanent. Note that it has to be one that the opponent controls, so you can't exile your own creature or your own permanent for whatever reason you want to do that, but typically cards like this you don't see a whole lot of play, but with this one, at least when you reach max speed, you're able to use it to pump up your creatures, put +1/+1 counters on your creatures, so it has more utility than just removal, so it might be worth playing as a 3 mana removal. I think at least it's worth testing out. Next we have Nesting Robot. It's a 1 mana 1/1 artifact creature robot. It has start your engines, and when this creature dies, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, and then at max speed this creature gets +1/+0. So honestly, this is probably one of the best ways to get your engines started. Just play this on turn 1, and not to mention, if you're putting this in a Boros deck, on turn 2 you can make 6 goblins with Gleeful Demolition. Just play this on turn 1, and then on turn 2, target it with a Gleeful Demolition, and then you get another 1/1 artifact creature and destroy that one with Gleeful Demolition, and then you have 6 goblins turn 2. Obviously, we're talking about the most perfect hand. You have to have this creature in hand as well as 2 Gleeful Demolition, and you'd have to have a mana that produces white mana and red mana on turn 1, which by the way is very much possible with the new Verge land, because it produces white mana first, and then if you play a mountain, then it activates the other side, so you'll be able to play both white and red. Anyways, enough with Disneyland talk. I think there's a lot of different utilities that this robot could fulfill. So again, another card worth keeping an eye on. Next we have Demonic Junker. 7 mana 4/3 vehicle, and it says affinity for artifacts. That means that this costs 1 colorless less for each artifact you control. When this vehicle enters, for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. If a creature you controlled was destroyed this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this vehicle. If you're playing a black deck that has a lot of artifacts in it, this could be a decent removal. Plus, if you're playing any sort of like sacrifice synergy, then you can even destroy one of your own creatures just to pump up this vehicle. And it has a fairly cheap crew cost, crew of 2, so shouldn't be too difficult to crew this and attack in for 6. I think if you can consistently play this on turn 3, that's a pretty good curve. I don't know how you're going to get 4 artifacts by turn 3, but I don't think it's impossible. Next we have Explosive Getaway. It's a 5 mana, 3 and a red and a white sorcery. Exile up to 1 target artifact or creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Explosive Getaway deals 4 damage to each creature. So this is a pretty expensive sweeper, and it's not a very good sweeper either, but it's sort of a one-sided sweeper. You get to protect one of your creatures or artifacts, and if it has an ETB, you can re-trigger that ability. The alternate art looks pretty cool though. Very exciting stuff, but I don't know if we'll see too much of this card. Next, we have Stock Up. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for sorcery that says, look at the top 5 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. It's kind of like Memory Deluge, except it's 3 mana instead of 4, and it's a sorcery instead of an instant, and it has no flashback, so probably not as good. But I don't know. Control decks might utilize a couple copies of this. Being sorcery is a huge downside though, so I don't know if this will see any play. Next, we have Tune Up. 4 mana sorcery. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it's a vehicle, it becomes an artifact creature. We've had other white reanimation spells that reanimate artifacts and enchantments and things like that. This one is specifically artifact only, but it has the upside that if it's a vehicle, your vehicle will permanently become a creature, because it doesn't say until end of turn. So if this card sees any play, it'll most likely be some sort of combo deck or something like that, where you're trying to reanimate a really good vehicle. Next, we'll be taking a look at the second cutest card from the set so far, District Mascot. The cutest one is actually right down here, Bestow Greatness. 3 mana instant. Target creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample until the end of turn. I just don't think this card is playable in a standard competitive setting, so I'm not really going to talk about it. District Mascot is 1 green for 0/0 creature dog mount. This creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it. For 2 mana, remove 2 +1/+1 counters from this creature, destroy target artifact. Whenever this creature attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Saddle 1. So it has a really cheap saddle cost, and this creature continues to scale from turn 1 on as long as you can consistently saddle it. The only downside is that it only targets artifacts. I really do wish that the ability targeted enchantments as well. We'll have to see if this is good enough to be played in mono green Stompy or any other aggressive green deck. Next up, we have Back on Track. It's a 5 mana, 4 and a black sorcery. Return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Create 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this token saddles, mounts, and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So we have another 5 mana reanimation spell. This time, along with the reanimation, it comes with a 1/1 pilot. Honestly, with the Zombify and Rite of the Moth, we have reanimation spells that cost much less than that. Well, 1 less than this. So you're looking at reanimating creatures a turn quicker. So if you're using Back on Track, it's definitely to get a vehicle back and to get that pilot. I don't know how strong a deck it's going to be that relies on this card for reanimation. It's definitely going to have to be a vehicle-centric deck, so if the vehicles are strong enough, maybe this will see play, but overall, I don't think this card is good enough. Next, we have Clamorous Ironclad. 4 mana, 6/3 artifact vehicle. It has Menace, Crew 3, and Cycling for 1 red. I think having a 1 mana cycling is pretty good. You can cycle this on like your earlier turns, and then later on, you can play this. And I'm thinking if you have Duretti, get this back. If you have Kaladin, you can give this haste and it becomes a creature. The 3 toughness definitely means that it's a lot easier to remove. Overall, we'll see if the cycling portion of this synergizes well with the other cards from this set. Next up, we have Haunt the Network. It's a 5 mana, 3 blue and a black sorcery. choose target opponent. Create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. Then the chosen player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So essentially for 5 mana, you at least gain 2 life and drain 2 life. But if you're playing Dimir with a lot of artifacts, which isn't too hard to do, you could always play the Siren to gives you a clue token. Obviously there's vehicles and whatever else. Yeah, there's a lot of artifacts, and there's a lot coming out with this set too. On turn 5, I could see this being a win condition in a Dimir deck. It'd be kind of interesting to play around this. Next we have Dredger's Insight. It is a 2 mana enchantment, 1 in a green. It says whenever 1 or more artifact and or creature cards leave your graveyard, you gain 1 life. When this enchantment enters, mill 4 cards. You may put an artifact, creature, or land card from among the milled cards into your hand. Overall, I think this is a really good card. It synergizes well with any sort of graveyard deck. I've seen some people talking about putting this into the Insidious Roots deck. I would say the only problem of putting this card into a deck like that is the deck really wants a lot of creatures in the graveyard, and you're kind of diluting the deck by adding more non-creature spells in it. We'll see how that works out. Next we have Ranger's Refueler. It's a 2 mana vehicle, 3/3 for 1 in a blue. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, draw a card. And then it has an exhaust ability. It says 4. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then it has crew 2. So for 2 mana you get a 3/3 vehicle that's fairly easy to crew. And then on turn 4, you can just turn this into a 4/4 creature and draw a card. And if you're also playing other cards that have exhaust abilities, obviously you'll be drawing cards each time you activate them. So depending on if there's a lot of good exhaust abilities that's easy to activate while this is out, this could actually see play. This might be a pretty good card. Again, it's very narrow in the sense that you want to play around, or you want to play it with other cards that have exhaust. I think for this to see play, there has to be some good exhaust abilities. And the final card for today is Haunted Hellride. The 3 mana 3/3. Whenever you attack, target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. Untap it. Then has crew for 1. I think this is pretty alright. 3 mana 3/3 vehicle isn't the best on curve, but it does have a pretty cheap crew cost, crew for 1. And it says whenever you attack, not whenever this vehicle attacks. So you can still trigger it on the turn you play this. It only pumps up one of your creatures and untaps it, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of different ways you can kind of exploit this. But overall, I think, I don't know if this card will actually see competitive play, but it's worth testing out. And that's all I have for today. Thank you for stopping by and checking out my video. I appreciate all the support. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And remember, have fun playing Magic, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. I really need to come up with some sort of way to end these videos.